Okay, we're in Numbers still, and basically we left off where the people didn't listen to Moses and they went up toward the land anyway, and a lot of them got killed and discomforted. They're starting to buck up against him. God told him he's not going to let the ones that didn't obey him enter the promised land with the generation after them. So now, after all that drama, God basically tells Moses and instructs him of some laws concerning the offerings and Sabbaths and all that when they enter Canaan. It also, one thing that caught me is it says, if a man does an ought presumptuously, whether he's born of the land or a stranger, the same reproacheth the Lord, and that soul shall be cut off from among his people. Because he despised the word of the Lord and hath broken his commandment, and that soul shall be utterly cut off, and his iniquity shall be upon him. A lot of us today, we do wrong, even though we know it's wrong, we still do it. You know, back, a lot of people just they mess up, but they didn't know. Then, you know, they did an offering for the atonement of their sins. Then you got some of them that do it intentionally. There's a lot of intentional sins in this world and in people's lives that we choose to do. Like I say, we'd be cut off from among his people if we was living back then, because of the way our minds think and how strong-minded we are. We do whatever anyway, whether we know it's wrong or right. So now you got a rebellion coming up. Korah, a Levite, they rose up against Moses with about 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown, mighty men. They rose up against Moses and Aaron and telling them they take too much on them, for all the congregations are holy and the Lord's among them. You know, why do you lift yourselves up above the congregation? And Moses heard it and he fell on his face and he told him, tomorrow the Lord will show us who is holy, and will cause him to come near unto him. He told them to take their censers, which is a torch to burn incense on it, and bring them. All the men had to bring their torches to stand before the tabernacle, and the Lord would say who is holy. You know, and they're basically accusing Moses of not taking them to the land, but bringing them back into the wilderness so they can be weak and die, and he can rule over them and be a prince. But that's not the case at all. So Moses told them to come back. Now Moses was wroth, he was angry. And he told the Lord, he said, don't respect their offerings. You know, he's basically telling them what happened. And so they had their incense and all that. And Korah gathered all of his congregation against them at the door of the tabernacle. And the Lord appeared unto them. The Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, saying, get away from them, and that I may kill them in a moment, that I may consume them. And they fell on their faces and told him, ask God, don't be mad with the whole congregation. I mean, all them didn't do it. See, once again, people's mourning and giving him so much stress, but he still protected them from God's wrath, because God could have killed them in an instant. So they told the congregation to leave, and they got from the tabernacle. And Moses told them, he says, you'll know that the Lord has sent me to do all the works, for I have not done them of my own hand. If these men die a common death, then the Lord didn't send me. But the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open her mouth and swallow them up, with all that pertained unto them. that they go down quick into the pit. Then ye shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord. So when he done said that, the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up Korah and all that pertained to him, all of his goods, his family, his children. And the earth closed back up after that. And you can hear them screaming, going down to the pit. And you think about it, this is the first example of hell. For hell, I believe, just me personally, is in the earth's core. It's the bottom. It's hot. And they went down to the pit. And you look through the Bible, hell is referred to as the pit. Where there's fire and gnashing of teeth. And then the rest of the men that stood there, the 250, the fire came out from the Lord, consumed them and killed them. And the people ran because they was afraid. And then the congregation gathered against them again. After all this happened, because they thought that the people that died was the people of the Lord. They were Levites, and the Lord told Moses, get up from them, that he may consume them in a moment. Then again they fell on their faces, and the Lord said in there and take a censer and put fire on it from the altar to make atonement for their sins, because a plague had begun. And Aaron took it as Moses taught him, ran in the midst of the congregation, and the plague killed a lot of them. And then where he stood, he's between the living and the dead, because the plague had done killed parts of them, and his atonement, his censer, that stopped the plague from killing the rest of them. And there died about 14,000 people right there. Man, that's a lot of people. Then it goes to the validation of the priesthood, because this would stop people from murmuring against them and say who could be priests and who's leaders and all that stuff. So they got all the men, everybody, to bring their rods in of the 12 house of the fathers of the 12 rods. There's 12 tribes. They got a rod from each tribe of the house to say who would be the leader of the Israelites. Then they got the tribe of Levi, which is Aaron's rod, and they put it in the tabernacle. They said whoever buds and brings forth blossoms and almonds will be the priest. That way they can't keep going back and forth of this and that, because that's proof that God chose the person whose rod budded to be the priest. So Aaron's rod budded and brought forth almonds, and then the Lord told him to take it back and leave it in the tabernacle for a memorial, for a testimony. That way they can't come against them again and say, well, why can't we be leaders and all this? So then chapter 18 tells about the duty of the Levites in support of them. For God had taken the Levites from among the children of Israel. They're given as a gift through the Lord's service of the tabernacle of the congregation. So they're not part of that inheritance, but of the land, but they get 1/10 of each tribe for their service, and they get their little cities within the land and stuff, which, I've got a map on my Facebook page. Look at the Bible through the eyes of a sinner, and it shows their layout and the cities of the Levites and all that. Let's see here. My pages are not sticking together. Okay. And then it goes down in chapter 19, talks about the red heifer sacrifice, which is basically someone touch a dead body, they're unclean. They go do a certain sacrifice and certain ritual to make them clean again. And then we get to the sin of Moses. Now you think about this. Moses was questioning God through all of his service to lead the Israelites out, and asked him, why did you put me in this situation? Why? But that wasn't considered a sin of doubting God. Which he didn't doubt him, but he just was kind of aggravated because he picked him to deal with all them people. So then in the wilderness, Miriam died and they buried her. There's no water, and they strove against Moses and Aaron again, and they chode with them. And, you know, would you want us to die out here and all that? And we could have been better in Egypt. And you've brought us out here to die. So they went from the presence assembly, and they fell upon their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. See, again, they fell on their faces. They was on the ground crying and praying. You know, a lot of people like to be proper and just stand up and put their hands together and just say a little prayer, fancy speaking prayer. No wonder they're so dead. But God told them to take the rod, gather the assembly together, and speak to the rock, and it'll bring forth water so they can have drink. And Moses took the rod and he commanded, as God commanded him. They gathered the people together, and he was fussing at them. He just had him stressed out. And he said, Hear now, you rebels. Must we fetch you water out of this rock? And he lifted up his hand with the rod and smote the rock twice, and water came out abundantly, and they drank. And the Lord told them, Since you believe me not to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, you should not bring this congregation to the land which I've given them. So since Moses sinned and didn't do exactly what God told him, he now will not see the promised land. He'll see it, but he will not enter the promised land. I mean, I don't believe he did it on purpose. I think he was just stressed out and just wasn't thinking clearly. But God taught him to do something, and he didn't do exactly what he said. So then they were marching to Moab. They're in the wilderness, and they sent forth messengers to ask the king of Edom, which is Esau, Jacob's brother. So they're cousins, basically. And they wouldn't let them go through. They said they'd come at them with a sword if they went in their land. So they had to go a long way around. The Lord told Moses and Aaron that Aaron shall be gathered to his people, and he shall not enter the promised land, because he rebelled against his word at the water of Meribah, which was when they smote the rock. So then they took Aaron's son Eleazar, and they put Aaron's garments on him, and then Aaron died and was gathered to his people. So now Eleazar is the new priest, Aaron's son, and the people mourned for Aaron for 30 days. All the house of Israel mourned. Now King Arad, the Canaanite, he dwelt in the south and heard about Israel, came by the spy the land, and he fought against them, and they took some prisoners. Israel vowed a vow unto the Lord, said, If thou wilt indeed deliver this people into my hand, then we'll utterly destroy their cities. And the Lord hearkened to them and delivered the Canaanites, and they destroyed them and their cities, and called the place Hormah. See, now they went to fight. Now first they got whipped, and they got some people took prisoners, but they vowed to God, and he let them destroy them in their cities. God delivered them to their hands. And you think about that now, we're going to have people come against us. But God will deliver them to us if we trust in him. We're going to have enemies. God will fight our battles if we allow him and trust in him. So then they were journeying again, and then the people spoke on him again and said, Why did you bring us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there's no bread, neither no water. Our soul loatheth this light bread. It's basically saying, why have you bring us out here? We could have been better off. Again, doubting God and not being thankful. Even though they've seen his power, they still turn and mourn and complain. They came to Moses and said, let's see, Then the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit them, and much of the people died. And the people came to Moses, We've sinned and spoken against the Lord. Pray to take the serpents away. And the Lord told him to make a serpent and set it on a pole. And whenever people get bit, they go look at it and observe it, and then they'll live. And that's because the thing is, God made them go back to the wilderness so they could die off to bring the new generation in, because that generation was turning against him and not trusting him and doubting him and all that. When you think about that, God has a purpose for everything. whether it be good or bad. And you know, people think it's one way, and other people think it's the other way. But it's like it's God's purpose, not ours, not our train of thought. Rather, we're just like a pawn on a chessboard, and He's just making the moves. So then they're pitching and setting forward and moving here and moving there and just going on their journey. And then they singing songs and, you know, just doing their little thing on their way to the promised land. Then they got to the king of Sihon and asked if they could pass through the land, but they wouldn't let them. They came out and fought against them. Israel smote them with the edge of the sword and possessed the land from Arnon into Jabbok. So they were strong and they dwelt in their cities. And Heshbon was the city of Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who had fought for it and took it from the Moabites. And there was a song about it, which it reads about the song. And they went and sent spies out to Jazer, and they took the villages thereof and drove out the Amorites that were there. And they turned around and went to the way of Bashan, and Og, the king of Bashan, went out against them, he and all of his people, to battle. And the Lord said to Moses, Fear not, for I have delivered him into your hand, and all of his people and all of his land. And you'll do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, which dwelt in Heshbon. And they smote him and his sons and all of his people, until there was none left him alive, and they possessed his land. So, these first couple of battles they did, they saved no one. They killed the men, the women, the children, probably the animals, everything. Because their rule, what God wanted them to do, was to leave none alive. Because there'll be a hindrance to turn them from serving the Lord and to turn to other gods and to get into their traditions. And their traditions and them serving other gods is why God wanted them out of that land. Because that land would have spewed them out anyway. But because they're abominations and stuff, God was sick. He didn't like that. He hated it. And that's why He wanted them to be out of there and had that land for a promise for His children. So now they're starting to move around. They're getting into wars and battles and fights. They're moving forward. So that's Numbers, up to Numbers 21. 22 and 23 are very interesting, and I got to take time to sit and think about this one and get into it, because it's a really deep chapters and make you think a lot. Alright, that is it.